I was reading an essay recently on the nature of the novel by Victorian philosopher T.H. Green. T.H. Green is hardly a household name now, but back in the day he was extremely influential. He was the first of what's now known as the British Idealist movement, a movement of philosophers that was heavily influenced by Hegel, but more adapted obviously to the British society and culture of the time. And this essay is one of Green's, in fact maybe his only work on aesthetic questions and the questions of literary form. What's interesting is how similar it is to the Marxist philosopher George Lukacs' early work, The Theory of the Novel, in starting by talking about the epic, the old form of literature, as seen in the Iliad, for example, by Homer, and saying how the novel marks a real break with that tradition. It represents a world that has lost the overall meaning, the sense of a wider purpose and perhaps supernatural destiny or fate that the epic and in other ways a tragedy possessed. The novel, to these thinkers, fitted in with a new society of individuals going about their business, trying to work out their place within this total system without being able to grasp it as a whole. For Lukacs, it conveyed the loneliness of the modern man, his uprootedness from traditional ways of life. And T.H. Green sort of disparages the novel in a similar way by saying it doesn't give any cohesive idea of an overall purpose to mankind's life as a collective. It's sort of part of the problem in one sense, although in another sense, as essentially a liberal who did believe in political liberalism, in another sense, he thinks it could be part of the solution in its very breaking apart of the previous unities and coherences of traditional forms of literature. It makes us face where we are now and think harder about where we want to go. Now, Lukacs, who at the point he wrote The Theory of the Novel was not quite a Marxist, he only became a Marxist later and became the most famous, if not notorious, Soviet theorist. Lukacs would say that T.H. Green, his hope of finding a new sort of social cohesion, unity, purpose is completely hopeless under the conditions of capitalism. That capitalism itself is part of this problem that will continue to fragment, to atomize social life. And the novel is a reflection of that. A related question is when so-called realism, and obviously it's very questionable as to how the realist novel, how much it really does reflect reality, if it doesn't ask deeper questions about what's structuring society, but sort of presents this individualistic world of personal ethical dilemmas almost as a natural thing. The deeper question is what the modernist authors of the 20th century, people like James Joyce and Virginia Woolf, what marks them as distinct from the realist novel. Because in some ways they seem to fragment things even further. Disparate voices, disparate styles, as in T.S. Eliot's seminal poem *The Wasteland*, saying we have nothing but a heap of broken images. And Frederick Jameson, the Marxist theorist who I frequently refer to, he would note that in modernist works there is always this attempt to find some kind of cohesion, some way in which all these fragments just might find a unity. He would point to, in James Joyce's Ulysses, how the very structure of the novel, as in the title, which kind of parallels each chapter with a different episode from the Odyssey, sort of attempts to suggest there's some kind of unity, even as obviously the use of the Odyssey is completely arbitrary. It could have been any other legend that Joyce could have picked up on. Or in Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, for example, the two main characters, Clarissa Dalloway and Septimus, who never meet, are kind of somehow unified, as is the rest of London's busy confusion, by the tolling of Big Ben's chimes on the hour, which spread out like a leaden circle, she says, to embrace all of London. So it's almost like the modernist writers were more dissatisfied with what a capitalist society had become, particularly after, of course, the horrors of World War One seriously called its wisdom into question, and they wanted to grope for some kind of greater totality, which, however, was always very questionable and tenuous. And, of course, Jameson would go on to suggest that postmodern writing just forgets about totality at all, and is more concerned with the play of signifiers, the free play, without any regard to finding a new kind of cohesion. So these questions remain live now in some ways, as Terry Eagleton asks, well, what more can the novel do after Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, which pushes experimentation with language to the absolute extreme? In many ways, novels since then have kind of returned to realistic modes of writing or adopted certain modernist methods, but in doing so could never be quite as fresh or astounding as the modernist rejection of older forms of the novel. Have we reached the end of art, as Hegel would suggest must happen before absolute spirit can be revealed? These questions remain live.